I'm Eric Skokan from Black Cat Organic Farm in Boulder, Colorado. We farm approaching 400 acres. We're certified organic, biodynamic as well. We grow market crops, vegetables for our local farmers market, as well as small grains, wheat, farro, emmer, einkorn, that sort of thing. We also raise hogs for pork, and we raise sheep for meat. My wife Jill and I own 2 restaurants in Boulder, and the lion's share of what we produce at the farm ends up supplying our 2 restaurants. Towards that end, we have produced all of the pork for the restaurant for about 9 years, all of the lamb for about 9 years, tomato puree, the corn for polenta, the carrots, blah blah blah. I can't think of the last time I purchased carrots to operate the restaurant.
That's super awesome. What would you say, like, I know you're saying the lion's share of your farm goes to the restaurant. What about what the restaurant is producing? Like, how much of that is wholly from your farm as well?
On an average day, and of course there's high season, low season, so there's some variation here in Colorado. On an average day, about 80% of what you see in the restaurant has come from the farm.
Awesome. That's awesome.
It's really, there's a handful of things. It's often easier to talk about the handful of things we don't.
Yeah, for sure.
Right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Fish. We don't produce our own fish. We don't have a dairy, so we're not making our own cheese and milk and whatnot. There are crops that just don't grow here: lemons, pineapple, grapefruit, those sorts of things, and olive oil, coffee, tea. Pretty much.
That's almost it. Wow.
Is coming from the farm.
That's really impressive.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
It's been challenging for us to close the gap. We have winter that happens and lows that hit -20, but the guests are still hungry. So
yeah.
And we can't have like the all turnip menu.
Yeah. No.
The range. Right?
Yeah. Winter is definitely tough because you lose a lot of your variety, and then the ones that are left start getting old pretty quick and don't quite go as far. And
yeah, exactly. So, so it's really been a soup to nuts kind of an operation, and we've failed a lot along the way, and we've succeeded a lot along the way, and every year we're refining the operation. This is our 11th year growing at sort of market scale. We work really hard. We're pretty proud of where we are production-wise. When you take it all together, our farm and restaurants, as far as I can tell, we're the largest farm-to-table operation in the country.
Wow.
Not necessarily in terms of size. There are a few cattle ranches plus steakhouse sort of combinations that have more size than us, but they're really a one-trick pony.
Mm-hmm.
The beef comes from their ranch, but nothing else.
And they sell burgers and steaks, and then that's kind of the end of it.
Right, and then the buns come from food service distributor or whatever. But in terms of the breadth, the total, the aggregate dollar value of things that are produced at the farm and then brought into the restaurant or whatever, when we look at it as a holistic way, we're magnitudes bigger than the next operation. We're almost 400 acres, and the next largest is about 40 acres. Everything started from a garden. I've been a chef my whole career, and planted a kitchen garden whose purpose was relaxation, right? It was recreation for me to, in the morning have my coffee, putter around in my slippers, and futz around in the garden and enjoy it, which I did. And then I made the garden big enough that that I was able to start harvesting some from the garden and bring it into the restaurant. And then I realized that that was really cool. That so this is now like 13, 14 years ago, where it's kind of cool to have a hobby that you can that you can leverage in your professional life as well, to be able to cross over. And so I made the garden even bigger so that I could bring more things into the restaurant. And then at some point it was this giant garden on steroids. And then I had an opportunity to lease farmland just outside of town, to turn my giant garden into a tiny farm, to make that that step up. And that year I planted 5.5 acres. I bought a tractor. I had never driven a tractor in my life. That was like all learning, all of it. Was really that was a tough year. But at the end of the year, we were selling at the farmers market, and which was great marketing for the restaurant. And I was having the time of my life. I was learning like so much. It was really a joy to be. For me, I'm driven by learning new things and experimenting and discovery, and I feel fundamentally uneasy when I think I know what I'm doing, and I really much prefer that endless searching and discovering and those aha moments and whatnot. And and that's what farming is all about. You never, I've learned that for as much as I know, I'll never know enough. I'll never know all of it, and whatnot. So the farm went from 5.5 acres up to 10 the next year, and then 20 the next year, and 40. And we're up at 130 for a while, for a couple of years. Now we're pushing 400, and and it's really been a. I guess the way I've approached farming in the end has been more like building a cathedral with Legos, more than anything else. You start with one Lego, and then you put another one, and then another one, and pretty soon you have a little wall. And I really had no idea when I started. I was really focused on building the wall, just putting these couple of pieces together. I really had no idea that I was going to, in the end, have built a cathedral. Like, that wasn't the initial vision. Some number of years in, then it dawned on me that what Jill and I had started doing was pretty powerful, and could be, it could be a big thing. That we had the opportunity to create a farm restaurant business model that would be able to demonstrate supplying and operating restaurants and taking care of our community in a fundamentally better way than existed, than exists everywhere, right, currently. Initially, it was, farming started out as gardening, and I was gardening for very, very selfish reasons. I love gardening. I love, planting and seeing things grow and harvesting stuff out of the garden and bringing it into the restaurant and making something simple that's like just stupid delicious. And it was all about me and that experience. Or initially I didn't realize the kind of greater potential of the small act that I was doing. Anyway, so now fast forward 11 years, and it's a really big farm. It's really complex. We have just a spectacular staff that we get to work with. Incredibly talented crew at the farm. We've got about 11 farm employees total. 3 of those are year-round employees, and the others are seasonal employees. Incredibly hardworking, super bright, really committed. Really, they're a group that really wants to cross T's and dot I's, in a really significant, really good way. It's a joy to work with everyone. We're also creating this big picture, I think paradigm changing method of operating a restaurant, where when the customer sits down and looks at the menu and you see the price next to the thing that you're going to buy, the pork chops or the vegetarian entree, whatever it is, like that price directly reflects everything that went into making whatever is on that plate, all of the labor, all of the whatever, as opposed to getting something in a fast food restaurant where it's ridiculously cheap, and a lot of it is kind of a subsidized economy that is either a direct subsidy sort of a thing, whether it's corn and soybean farmers or whatever on one end, or it's the externalities, the pollution that comes off of those operations that are negatively affecting the environment around, and ultimately we have to pay for that at some point, now and in the future. And in our model, it's it's a do all of the good that happens in restaurants, but a leave no harm part, right? So, and that's it's really amazing to be a part of that kind of an opportunity, and at the same time, I still have my selfish desires. I get to drive a tractor, which I love. I get to garden and be out in the sun and play with the animals and all that kind of stuff, and it's a blast. It's seeing the seasons change, working outdoors is an absolute joy. It's a really good fit for who I am as a person. So I get to have my cake and eat it too, I guess, right?
Yeah. The dream. Yeah.
It's the dream, right? The big challenge in farming is that there are so many big challenges in farming.
Yeah. The single big challenge.
One of the big challenges in farming is that that the closer you are to the market that you're selling, the fresher the product is, the more direct the connection is between the people eating it and the land itself. And the closer that connection is, ultimately I think the better it is. But the challenges are greater the closer you are to your market. So, for commodity farmers 500 miles away from their market, it's really easy to farm. You don't have to deal with neighbor complaints and blah, blah, blah. It's just kind of wide open spaces, and you're just able to go and farm. But you're really far away and disconnected on a daily basis from the lives of the people that you're serving. And farmers are we're servants, right? We're here to help take care of our communities. That is what we do. But it's really hard to keep that part front and center when we are when you're 500 miles away from your customers, or when you never see your customers ever. At that point, it's easy to think of farming as all about the corn or all about the commodity or whatever, and I think it's the beginning point of some unhealthy decision making. So that's the challenge when you're far away. The closer you make it to your customers, the better it is for your customers, and maybe the more healthy the operation. But once you make it into an urban environment, your operation ends up being a small piece of a bigger community, and that opens up all kinds of challenges. Neighbor complaints. Your animals bust through a fence and make it out into the highway and cause a traffic jam. That's actually happened. That's a real thing.
Your row covers disrupt someone's morning coffee.
Exactly, right?
The shine from the row covers.
Yeah. So the farming operations, and specifically vegetable operations, market vegetable operations, leeks, carrots, lettuce, and when you're growing a bunch of different things, in order to grow those different things well, each crop needs its pieces in order to grow successfully. And when you grow 50 different crops, you need 50 sets of pieces, and they're not all the same pieces, right? So you end up with lots of stuff. Tomato stakes and cages and tote boxes and row cover and right? And from a farmer's perspective, that's all necessary stuff. From your neighbor's perspective, it's junk.
Just cluttering up the view.
It clutters the view, right? And they may intellectually understand that those things are necessary, but they're able to keep their backyard clean. So why can't you, right? And so so there are neighbor conflicts. There's traffic conflicts. We have to transport tractors and equipment on the roads, the same roads that we're all driving on to commute to work or bring our kids to school or go to the grocery store. It's the exact same roads: tractor, combine, baler, hay rake, AB, blah blah blah. Like we're on the same roads, and we cause traffic jams and frustrate commuters who are late to work, and that's a conflict. Besides the fact that it's when someone's whizzing by your tractor at 65 miles an hour and you're going 12 miles an hour, it's not the safest thing in the world, right? Mm-hmm. If somebody is texting while driving and they don't quite notice my big tractor, accidents happen in a really bad way. So, so there are traffic problems. There are, different members of the community have different expectations of how the land should be, utilized, what it should look like at the end of the day, recreation versus animal production, or versus food production, clean, wide open park-like vistas versus, intensively used, areas. We have, here in Colorado, we don't have enough water naturally falling, and so we have to bring in irrigation water, which for us is via snow melt. Winter snows melt in the summertime, come through the rivers and then through canals and ditches out into the farms, and a lot of those water canals pass through people's backyards, and so you end up with legal rights and water issues, and a neighbor may think that it's convenient to throw the grass clippings into the ditch behind their property, because it all just kind of goes away. It all disappears.
It leaves their view, and it's out of sight, out of mind, and doesn't matter.
It ends up clogging my head gate, which I need to irrigate my field, which then floods the next door neighbor, and all of a sudden it's my fault that the head gate got stopped up and flooded a neighbor and blah blah blah. But it's this, sort of, lack of understanding and mix of expectations or whatever, and that's also a true story. So it's challenging, right? It's really hard to grow in an urban environment. The challenges are just much greater. Farmers who I think farm well in an urban environment tend to have better interpersonal skills than, and I think that needs to be sort of a gut check for everyone going into it, that if you are an introvert and you feel like interpersonal skills is not one of your top 4 personal qualities, farming in an urban environment is going to be a real challenge. Because you're going to be in conflict. You don't get to say that, like, I'm getting into farming so I don't have to deal with people, because it's urban environment. Like, the defining characteristic is people. Is people. A whole bunch of them. Yeah, and people with differing expectations and different needs, and and that sort of thing. And conflict is inevitable. Even in the best case scenario, there are always going to be a few conflicts along the way. If interpersonal skills are not one of your strong suits, if getting into farming means for you not dealing with people, then I would seriously consider being at least 80 to 100 miles away from an urban center, and having a lot fewer neighbors. And of course, it's a trade-off, right? Now you're trucking food longer distances. We have some of our friends who grow food 200 miles away from their customers, and they spend 6 or 8 hours a day in vehicles trucking food from farm to their drop-off locations. And it's neither right nor wrong. It's neither good nor bad. But it's a total trade-off. I don't know. And I think each individual farmer needs to make that decision for themselves. If they loathe driving, be an urban farmer and brush up on your interpersonal skills. If you love the solitary time behind the wheel out on a deserted highway, take the 100-mile away from, take the opportunity to farm 100 miles away, and work on your website so that you can sell more in the city or whatever, and then buy more books on tape so you can listen to them in the car or whatever on your way in. But that's ultimately a personal decision, I think. Farming around Boulder is, I think, is a little different than it is in many urban areas, in that we have a 50-50 mix in terms of land availability between privately owned areas and publicly owned areas. We have what's called an open space system, so the local government has been buying development rights or buying property outright, starting from the 70s through today, and then leases a lot of that farmland or potential farmland back to farmers to keep fields in production instead of turning it into housing developments or strip malls or whatever. So we have private areas, and we also have these sort of leased public areas. When we first started farming, when we made the transition from garden into farm, we took advantage of a beginning farmer program where people with just enough gardening farming experience. After taking a class on how to, run a farm business, were qualified to participate in a program to lease small amounts of county open space agricultural land, and that's how we got our foot in the door. The initial 5.5 acres, and unfortunately, or it's just it's the way it is, that when you're starting out in farming, you are more often than not looking to start farming on any available land. So is it good land?
Yeah, you're just taking what you can get, and you're not really judging it. You just need space, you need access to it, and I'll take it if you got it.
And that was very much us. We took over a space with no running water, no buildings, no electricity. It was just a field with dirt in it. And we had to start all of the infrastructure that was necessary in order to create a market farm. We did it ourselves on my credit card, right? A little bit at a time. And starting a new farm is really expensive. You have to do the farming full on. That's hard. And then building a farm is another full-time job. And of course, you're not going to get paid in your first year, so you need to have a full-time job.
So that's 3 jobs right there.
3 full-time jobs in that first year. And I think everybody going into it needs to have that kind of an expectation that, the first 1, 2, 3 years is just going to be stupidly difficult. You need to, pay your mortgage or make your rent, get gas in your car, and be able to eat at the end of the day. You need to be able to farm, and grow the vegetables or whatnot. And then generally speaking, you're starting with nothing, right? And so you're having to build everything from scratch. Anyway, so, it's important, I think, to have that expectation. It's also important to understand that those first 1, 2, 3 years, you need to pay your dues and do it, do a good job to the best of your ability, and understand that you're going to fail, but you have to keep plugging away. Grit and determination that's every bit. That's in the top 3 of qualities that you need to be able to bring to the table. After you've proven yourself for a couple of years, someone who does have land can look at your operation, and keep in mind they're really just looking at it while they're sitting in their car. They're not going to inspect it intensely, but if it looks good, if it looks like you can manage the land, then they will be more apt to potentially lease new land to you that may have better facilities or better soil types or better access to water or better fertility or whatever it is. And then, and that's basically, how you end up, sort of proving yourself, in the market. If you put yourself in a property owner's shoes, let's say it's a farmer who's retiring, spent their whole life taking care of this property, and they are entrusting their life's work to to you for the next X number of years. And if you're doing a fundamentally mediocre job, from their perspective, they're probably not going to want to take a risk on seeing all their hard work, fritter away. But if when they take a look at your operation, that it looks really good, and that you're enjoying it, like that it seems like you're in a sustainable, place, then they're very, very apt to, to let you, lease or buy their land. Some of the things to think about in terms of land selection, if you make it to that place where you actually have, choices, transporting equipment is a big deal. Keeping the distance between farm A and farm B, field A and field B, as short as possible is really important. That's a mistake that I think Jill and I made, early on. We were taking first available, because we felt we needed to grow, instead of taking closest. We put proximity further down on our list. And as a result, we spent a lot of time driving tractors on busy roads.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. Having infrastructure on a field is such an important deal. Being able to step inside out of a thunderstorm into a building on the ground that you're farming is an incredible luxury. So nice. And we couldn't do that in that first year.
Yeah.
Actually, the first 2 years.
Just a big empty plot, and if it rained, there you were.
There were cars.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
Everybody runs to your cars, and and then we're all kind of looking at each other in a series of 4 or 5 different cars, right, and waiting until the rain ends, and blah blah blah. Challenging, doable, right? We did it. We did it for a couple of years. Most people probably need to do something similar to that. But man, it's really nice to be able to step into a barn. Access to running water, really, really key. Good fencing to keep your animals in is really, really important. Fencing is all about keeping your animals in, much more so than keeping predators and blah 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 out. Coyotes are good at hopping through fences or over fences or whatever, foxes and whatnot. But keeping your animals in the property is really important. I mentioned potable water, and then the list kind of can go on and on and on. Do you have a big enough tap size to irrigate effectively if you're using city water, a city water tap? Most houses will have a 1/2 inch or a 3/4 inch tap, which will let out just enough water to operate a house and maybe water the lawn. But if you're farming in a city, an acre or 2 acres, that might end up taking you 10 or 12 hours of irrigation time at a small amount of water to make it through a whole irrigation cycle on your property, and that means that you're held captive for 12 hours moving water around on your property.
Yeah.
That ends up being a challenge, right?
I mean, the transition is, is really, really hard, and it all happens, kind of inside your head. When you're an employee or when managing something or whatever, there are boundaries, there are limits to the things that you need to think about. You have a list of jobs, and you start at the top and work your way to the bottom, and and whatnot. But when you're the owner, and farming is really a very strong example of this, you end up having to think about everything.
Yeah.
And you end up thinking about everything all the time. Yeah. So instead of making it to the bottom of your list and then ending the list, right? And then and then Netflix and popcorn and blah blah blah. It's not like that. It's instead you make it to the end of that list, and you begin thinking about all the new things that have to go onto that list. And it's not just this list, kind of nonstop list making. It's really thinking about that list in terms of the entirety of the operation. Farming is at its best and most challenging is a very holistic, operation. Farms are kind of a living organism inside of the greater world, and the difficulty or the joy, same thing, but depending on how you look at it, is your opportunity to for the farmer to see, manage, dream, have nightmares about how their farming operation as a whole fits into the greater scheme of the community. The marketing, the legal and tax stuff, the transportation issues, the nuts and bolts of literally having the right nuts and bolts to hold the equipment together, and then it's the soil biology and the needs of the plants and making all of those things, sort of come in together. That's ultimately what a farmer is thinking about, all the time. And it is, being in that world without boundaries is, it can be exhausting. It can be really challenging. And at the same time, it can be liberating and incredibly rewarding. At the end of the day, I feel like I'm doing something real, something tangible. I am making the world a little tiny bit better, every day by getting my farming operation to be the best possible fit in this greater community, in this greater landscape. And I think in our modern times, that is a rare and absolutely wonderful, opportunity to have.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely a very heartfelt part of it's like, if I'm going to have a job, at least this one, I feel like I'm doing something good. I feel good about it. Yeah.
And and in farming, things are never, Joe and I learned this very, very early on. Things are never good, nor are they bad. They are a mix of good and bad, and it's the labels we choose to put on them that, end up being, how we think about it. What for me is liberating and enjoyable and ultimately rewarding, for the next person may be a prison. It may be, oppressive and feeling, just rotten. But it's neither of those things. It's, how I choose to respond to it or whatever. And for me, farming is a great fit. I love it. I'm driven by it. It's really good.
Have there been times that it's felt like the prison for you?
On Christmas Day 2 years ago, Christmas morning was spectacular. Family in from out of town, presents, kids, fire in the fireplace, great breakfast, awesome, beautiful weather. And around 1 in the afternoon, the wind picked up. And by 4 in the afternoon, we had 100-mile-an-hour winds blowing through the farm.
Oh my God.
By about 4:30, our greenhouse blew up, and we lost it. Whole buildings were being knocked over and rolling in the fields. The pigs, which live out in the fields, found that all of their fences didn't exist anymore. They were gone in Kansas or Nebraska or wherever they blew to. And it went from Norman Rockwell, It's a Wonderful Life, perfect morning, into it was so crazy, challenging. It brings tears to my eyes how difficult it was, and worst possible time. And and so all of us, we all suited up to go out into the weather and save the farm. all the kids, the whole family. We all, put our, push the wrapping paper aside and, and went to get the pigs out of the highway. Right? It's farming.
Yeah.
It's the way it goes.
Yeah, farming. 100-mile-an-hour winds don't care. That's Christmas.
No. Yeah, Christmas is a. It turns out Christmas is a human construct, right? It's an relatively arbitrary date, and so, oh well. Yeah, and there are absolutely times like that that are a gut check where we really don't enjoy it. When we middle of the night after working in the restaurants or whatever, and we go out to check the lambs during lambing season, and we find one that's almost alive. It's just barely holding on, and it's snowing and it's cold and it's miserable, and we're working super hard and we're so tired, and we end up losing the lamb anyway. Ugh. It's a gut check. Yeah. And I think to myself in those moments, man, I hope no one complains about how expensive the lamb is in the restaurant tomorrow, because I'm going to lose it. It's really hard sometimes. But I think in farming, you really, for the disasters, you have to have a short memory. You have to have a long memory on learning from your mistakes, but when Mother Nature steps in and creates a disaster for you, you just have to. It's just part of it. You just deal with the death, and you deal with the inconvenience and the misery and the tired and the whatever, and then and then it goes away, and then now it's gorgeous out here. Yeah. I'm the luckiest guy ever to be able to work out here in the farm, and all those things just balance themselves out. Start with more money than you think you need. In your first year of operation, it's really important to see where you're spending time and focus your capital, what equipment you're going to buy, focus your capital on reducing the amount of time that you're spending. Additionally, farming is this mix of different jobs. Some of them you love, and some of them you hate. And, it's really important to carry enough joy through the days. And so, hire people to do the parts that you don't want. Buy the piece of equipment that does the work for you, or design the system. For us with the pigs, I've hated shoveling manure. I don't like shoveling manure. Our whole pig,
really?
Our whole pig system is based on me deciding, I don't want to shovel manure anymore. I don't want to be a manure spreader. I want to do other things. And so, my way in doing that was designing a system, but hiring a company to do that, or buying the equipment to do it for you to make it easy, all of those are completely valid options, with the goal in the end, the work has to get done. The goal in the end is to figure out how to come out of the backside of that happy, and satisfied. And if you end up with 3/4 of the work you find to be drudgery, and only a 1/4 satisfying, well, that's not a good recipe, right? So, focus in on the parts that you like, and whatnot. Another is, just because you have expectations that you love carrots or chickens or whatever, you might find that other parts are very, very rewarding. So be open, don't be stuck in your thinking as you go in to farming. Be very open to learning new things and new approaches. There are a lot of really smart farmers out there, much, much smarter than me, and I'm learning from them all the time. and our operation is getting better. Like my being humble about it, makes for a better operation over time. We look at a bunch of different metrics. In the end, farming is a dollars and cents business, where in theory you're supposed to have more money in the bank account at the end of the year than you had at the beginning, and no one's ever going to get rich farming monetarily. That can't be the expectation, but so we track everything, all the money that we spend, the labor, the amount of money that we spend on feed for the hogs, or the lease rates, the rent rates when we have to rent in water, and we track everything. Being good administrators of the business, I think, is a really important piece of the piece of the operation. Tracking how much you spend on seeds. Some seeds are very, very easy to save, and can reduce the amount of money that you spend during the seed purchasing period in the winter and the spring. Some types of seeds are incredibly hard to save, and from my perspective, it's a total waste of time and resources and money to try to save that.
At a certain point, you're kind of recognizing, like, I'm not in the seed producing or saving like saving it if it saves you money, but that's not your actual goal. You're not selling seed,
right?
And so,
right.
Kind of recognizing when it's worth it to bring that in from outside.
Yep. And seed production is a good example. Another thing that we track is in terms of sales, what different products we're selling. Pork chops versus pork shoulder, or cured bacon versus raw pork. Pork chops or whatever, versus carrots versus wheat versus farro, right? And so we track the sales of all the different things, and that allows us to, emphasize some products, make sure we're not running out of them, and de-emphasize others. We balance that with this idea that when customers come to the farm stand, the farmer's market, that they're not looking for just our tomatoes generally, or just the arugula, and we grow great arugula. Generally, they're looking for some level of convenience. So if they came for our arugula, we really want them to buy some green beans, some cucumbers, and some whatever. Having a broad variety of produce is critical, but if you grow an equal amount of everything, you lose the opportunity to refine, get the nuance sort of level of having the right number of carrots and whatnot. In the end of the day, if we've done a really great job, we have nothing left over. We sell out of everything equally, or we have like a couple handfuls of everything. We've never made it there, but that's that mythic goal where we're adjusting the breadth of the offerings, and then also the depth, the quantity of each individual thing. And the metric we use for that is tracking sales, track sales. And it's sometimes that sales tracking seems like drudgery, but it's pretty important. We're also continually looking at testing soil, looking at organic matter. That's a super important number for us. It's not the end-all be-all, but it is a great. If you only have the bandwidth to look at one number, looking at soil organic number is probably the right number to choose. and that's not how I think. I'm very much a big picture sort of a thinker, but so we look at soil organic matter, and we're always trying to increase that a little bit or make sure that it's not falling. Of course, we're looking at NPK, numbers as well, but that's very much that takes the back seat in a. And the NPK number is the number that we're looking for success right now at this moment, but soil organic matter is the number that we're looking for success of the farm as a whole and moving forward, right? Yeah. And I'm the biggest believer in taking soil samples. Knowing what's going on is always a better thing. Jill and I believe, in terms of metrics, just as a philosophy, that it's better to have 20 kind of accurate samples over a period of time than having only one perfectly accurate sample once.
Because you're watching the trend.
Trends in farming are much, much more important than and give you so much clearer of a picture than having one perfectly accurate test. So that is the same thing with tracking farmers market sales, tracking labor costs or other input costs into the farm, or tracking water usage or soil organic matter or whatever it is. And so another little bit of advice is don't stress about the perfect accuracy in any sample. Instead, if it's fast, allow for fast, quick, sampling, even if you know that there's a little, it's 5% over or under. When you put 20 of those samples next to each other, the probability of error drops really, really quickly and gives you a really, I think, a really accurate, a really nuanced view of what's going on. And we build that metric philosophy into everything, whether it's in the restaurants and food cost. We do a food cost once a week, and it's not very accurate, but we do it every single week instead of doing it once a month and having it be very, very accurate. Same thing with wine cost, and same thing with sales in the farmers market, and we're testing all the time, at the farm as well. Yeah, I think that's an important piece of the equation. Yep.
Yeah, it's like, because you can tracking it is important, and then actually examining it and going back and looking at it so that you can see that trend.
Yep.
Because otherwise, just building up this whole list of records without referring to it, you can't really use it.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. There's another piece to that, is that I'm really busy, and I have just an average memory for stuff. And if I spend 2 weeks generating a perfect, or a month generating a perfectly accurate test on something, I'm not good enough to remember what I did 30 days ago that caused, or may have caused, the result that I'm looking at today. But I can remember what happened 5 days ago pretty well. And so
it's like a testing
frequency,
found your short-term memory and just keep within that.
Yep. And it ends up being, infinitely more. It's testing for testing's sake is ridiculous. It doesn't make any. It's the questions that the testing. What are your questions? What are your answers? And if you can't remember what caused, what were the important causal.
Why did I start doing this?
Right, and and was it this that or the other thing that was the most important thing 30 days ago that got me to this point today? And if you can't answer that, then it's pointless, right? And so, yeah, so we're big fans of, quick and dirty, thousands of little flashes of light instead of one really accurate blip and stuff. Anyway, yeah, so that's that. One of the great things that we have going for us in urban farming is that our customers, this local community, are becoming more and more educated and value, what's happening. That's kind of the world, that we're in, and that's a good thing and a bad thing, right? It's great that our customers understand that there are different varieties of arugula, and that some might taste better than others at different parts of the season, right? Like educated consumers is great. One of the problems is that our consumers often will tend to overestimate their knowledge of whatever the issue is, right, and that's just that just makes everything really difficult, moving forward. From their perspective, it's all so simple, right? Because they're not in the thick of it like you are, and that, like I mentioned before, that in a broad spectrum community, everyone comes in with different hopes and dreams and expectations. And when you add that semi-educated, person into the mix, that ends up being, that's a challenge, right?
The danger of just a little bit of knowledge.
The danger of a little bit of knowledge, right? So, but that's one half. The other half is, the other customers around it know and appreciate and are willing to spend a little bit more money for the produce that they value, that you're growing. They're willing to pay an extra $1 a pound if the flavor is that good. That is awesome. Another challenge is that there are more and more urban farms, and as more people enter into the market, like 10 years ago there were none or one, or like it was a super rare thing, and so there was almost unlimited land and opportunity to be able to begin, but uneducated customers. And now we have more educated customers, but the opportunities to find the piece of property, the land, in order to begin is harder and harder. I would much rather be where we are today than where we were, then. But it really is a challenge. In our community, we have more and more difficulty, based on the traffic and moving equipment around and that sort of thing. That ends up being really difficult for us. And as this area grows in terms of population, that's only going to become more difficult. And when population increases, becomes more dense, there's there are other needs that are not invalid. There are other needs out there that start to compete with the resources that we need in order to be able to function. Water, water, seeds, fuel, equipment, labor. One of the biggest challenges we have right now is housing for farm workers, and I see that only getting worse over time. No one gets rich farming. There's not a lot of money in it, rent rates keep going up, and as population becomes denser, each locality has a zoning office that becomes more restrictive, and new housing ordinances or limits on population growth or whatever are one of the most common ways that localities will control population growth. And that directly and significantly negatively affects farmers, where who can afford to farm and spend 50% of their income on rent. It's not possible. Housing, man. Farming is a mixture of success and failure, and everyone fails at farming. And even when you're really successful at farming, there's some parts of your operation that are failing. It's always going to happen, and it's important to never get discouraged, about that. And in fact, it's possible to see failure as one of the important steps along the way towards success. We're growing artichokes in the other field, and I've been working on growing artichokes well for 10 years, and I'm getting there. I'm almost there. We're starting to harvest meaningful numbers of artichokes in a way that's not like parting the Red Sea, right? We have a system, and it's starting to work. It's probably taken 7 to 10 years to every year adjust, and I often think that success is a 12-step process where steps 3, 6, and 9 are complete failure, right? And then after the third step, where it's obliterated and it's depressing, then step 4 is sifting through the ashes. Step 5 is coming up with a plan. Step 6, fail again. And then you repeat the process. You make it to step 12, and it works really, really well. And that, I have so much pride in making it through that process. And at this point, it's completely an expectation, right? So I'm dumbfounded when I do something well the first time, and in fact, pretty skeptical about it. I usually can't believe my luck, or whatever, and stuff. But that's, I think, one of the characteristics that's the mindset that's kept us going, for a really long period of time, and has really gotten the farm to be a pretty good farm now. There's lots to be proud of.
What is it that kind of kept you going when you hadn't made it to step 12, or even believed that step 12 could exist, that at step 3 that you're going to step 4, we're just sifting through those ashes?
Fortunately for Jill and me, we had the restaurants. We had the restaurants, which created the financial stream for us, and for us it was an island of competency. We're really good at running the restaurants, and that's been my career. I've been a chef for forever, and I'm a pretty good cook, and so we knew at step 4 that we could walk away from farming at any time and still end up with a pretty rich and satisfying life. So really, it's at the beginning. Cherish for the new farmers. Cherish your islands of competency. Don't let those go, and swim in a sea of experiments and failure. Right? You need to have those islands around where you're really confident in what you're doing, starting out in just as a garden and then a really big garden, then as a small farm, allowed me to devote 80% of what I was doing in that year, one of those beginning years, to be stuff that I knew what I was doing already. I knew how to grow the lettuce, I knew how to grow the Swiss chard and the arugula and the peas and the blah. I knew all of that, and I was doing that. 20% of the farm I devoted into stuff I have no idea. I've never touched a sesame plant. We're growing sesame.
Really?
Right?
Wow.
I've never touched a sesame plant before, and I have no idea if it's going to turn out well or not, right? But it doesn't matter if it fails. I've done my homework. It shouldn't fail.
Yeah.
I don't want it to.
You're not just taking shots in the dark.
It's not shots in the dark, right?
Intelligent
Yeah.
experiments.
Yeah, and there's the old phrase, don't bet the farm. I'm not willing to bet the farm on a sea of experiments. But at the same time, I'm not so confident that I actually know what I'm doing that I'm only going to do, the 80% of stuff that I normally do, that I'm only going to do that, right? I'm always going to add in the extra 20% of experiments, educated guesses, little tweaks to this system or that system. And then we built from there, right? Started with a couple Legos, then we built the wall, and then pretty soon it's a cathedral, right? But, I hadn't planned on building the cathedral at the very beginning. I was just playing with Legos.
Too big a project to start with.
No. I would have failed. I couldn't have done it. Yeah. Yep, that's that.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot, Eric.
Indeed.
Really appreciate it.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep, my pleasure.